when we started our conversation, you were talking about God and even the mind of God. And now we've reached this point where we are talking about Leibniz. And you made this point that on one side, Leibniz thinks everything is made and everything happens for a reason, which is very deterministic. Say there are reasons for everything.
He's a rationalist.
Exactly. And on the other side, you said, yeah, but he said that in the mind of God, but in a way also, he also took into account this idea of it's deterministic, but it's like if it were infinitely deterministic, and only the mind of God.
An infinite chain of reasons that only God
exactly.
can appreciate. That
you see,
can't.
you keep going and you remember everything.
Right. No, I mean, Leibniz recognizes that there are contingent events, but he says to God there are no contingent events. But we would have to have an infinite mind.
Exactly. So I told you that I did my some kind of a dissertation and in the University of Edinburgh. It was actually about determinism and determinism.
Oh, really?
But philosophically. And so that's the reason why I'm very aware of what you were saying about Leibniz. And one of the points that I try to make is to say, let's say, if there is an infinite number of reason of cause, we will say, for you to do something, in a way, you will say, how come that you are going to do it if there is an infinite number of causes to do it? It's like if let's say, if the universe is infinite, I'll try to summarize the argument, which is a little bit tricky, but makes.
It's not enough to say that God's mind is infinite or God is infinite in his intellectual ability. Which infinity? There are a lot of infinities.
Yeah, of course.
You see, there may be different gods at different levels.
Yeah, but if you allow me just to finish with the point I tried to make that is very related to what we said just before.
Okay.
It is the idea that let's take an example of someone that is actually smoking. You ask him, why are you smoking? And he's smoking because, let's find the reason. He's smoking because his parents were smoking, and he wants to imitate his parents. That's his reason. He said that. It might be true. Like he's smoking because
he's nervous.
But let's say, yeah, but we are asking him and we trust him. It's just the exercise of mind to say that. And so he has a brother or sister, and he's not smoking. Say, why aren't you smoking? Oh, actually, I'm not smoking because my parents are smoking. And exactly. And he said, no, I'm not smoking because and for both of them, one is smoking, the other one is not smoking, but for the same reason, because their parents are smoking. But
one is to be different from the parents, the other is because
that means there
whatever you do,
what I'm saying is that there is always a reason inside a reason ad infinitum. And so that makes it, so in a way we will say, you have an infinite number of reasons to smoke and an infinite number of reasons to not smoke. So why do you smoke or not smoke? So that's what is randomness, what I mean, like that reached the point where we talk about freedom or something. But now, if in the mind of God, because the reasons are infinite, when you say, if you are infinitely determined to go on one side, if the universe is infinite, you are also infinitely determined to go on the other side. So in fact, it's like you were saying you are not determined at all, if you are infinitely determined.
I don't quite follow all of that.
Because let's say, let's take another example.
But I have a lot to say about infinity in the mind of God.
Let's take a balance.
There are lots of infinities. So the question is, how infinite is God? I mean, clearly we're finite in our intellectual abilities, right? An individual human, at least, the human race, is bigger than one individual, right? But clearly, we're finite. And, the theologians always say God is infinite and we're only finite. How can a finite being comprehend an infinite being?
I don't know if we are finite. I think it's a finite view to see ourselves as finite.
Oh, because each atom is infinite and has infinite complexity inside it.
Exactly. And so when we say we are finite, we are just taking the side of usefulness. The fact that we want to limit ourselves in order to be able to say something and to use the word in a certain way. But if we reach the point where we just want to contemplate, this time we are reaching our infinite part.
Good point.
Because we let it open.
Well, just as a pure mathematician, and since Virginia reminded me, I have to say that infinity in math, there are many infinities. There are bigger and bigger infinities. And it gets bigger and bigger forever.
Yeah,
and
that's also the Cantor idea with the different,
Exactly. So if one says that God is infinite, how infinite is the... but yes, abstract thinking requires throwing away. You simplify.
Yeah.
Right.
The argument I wanted to make earlier on is to say, just imagine, it's not a question of knowledge for me now, it's a question of what we call conditionment, the fact that you're conditioned to do something. If you have a balance, just imagine a balance, and on one side you have a weight, and on the other side you have another weight. If you are going to do that instead of that, it's because the condition, the codes are heavier on one side than the other. But if the universe is infinite, that means you can never reach a point where one part of the balance will be heavier than the other, right? So it has to be chosen. If you don't choose, if you don't add your own weight, which is not really weight, your mind or something on one side, it will never reach the point where you will have some kind of a decision, some kind of an action. So that means that there is something...
I didn't understand that. I agree that actions and decisions are made by throwing out, by ignoring things. Otherwise, for example, you'll never decide to get married.
Yeah.
You have to at one point say, I'll jump. I'm not going to think anymore. I'm not going
Transition, to go beyond something, that yeah, exactly. But...
Can I mention a Buddhist guru, a friend of mine, Chaitin in Mumbai? He wrote a poem about Omega, and one of the remarks is, a flower, you may think it's nothing, it's just a flower blowing in the wind there on a hill. But inside that flower, the whole universe is inside that flower, if you look.
Yeah, exactly.
The whole universe.
Yeah.
And maybe Sufism mystics also feel that. The flower has the presence of God inside.
Sure. And so now finishing with God and Leibniz, just related to this last remark, we will say that when we are saying that, and when Leibniz even is saying that there is an infinite chain of reason, but only God knows it, and for God is not, it's also because the way God understands, and so the way God knows is not what we think is knowing as understanding. Because when we are thinking about understanding and knowing, again, we can't help thinking about closure, making something like grab something. But God, we will say, doesn't do that. He's the pure contemplation type, I will say.
And sees it all.
When we say he sees it all, it doesn't mean that he actually grabs it, because it would be too small for him to even try to grab something. So that means...
But the universe is God, if you follow Spinoza.
In a way, the universe is God. But saying again that the universe is God, that means the next step that is not done already. When we say that he understands it and he knows it, that doesn't mean he imprisons it in something that will be an intellect, the way we think it when we think about understanding. That just means that he leaves it open, because it will be too small for him to grab it and to make it, to imprison it in what we think is an intellect when we are thinking about comprehension. So the comprehension of God being infinite, that means his mind is leaving open everything to happen. It's what means understanding, I think, in the eye of God, if we can say the eye of God metaphorically. Because when you are thinking again about an eye, you are thinking about focusing. So you are thinking about limitations, which is not something that God could feel.
The all-seeing eye.
What?
The all-seeing eye.
And when we are thinking about the all-seeing eye, right away we see that we are not talking about a regular eye. Like we are not going to talk about our eye, even if like the rose example that you actually took, that you actually mentioned, our eye being limited in appearance has also a side that can have an intuition of its own infinity.
Mm-hmm.
And so the infinity of God itself.
Okay, but just to show that pure mathematics has achieved some things, it can enrich this conversation. Cantor thought he was inspired when he realized that there were infinities and infinities and infinities. And in a way, the work I've done my whole life on program size complexity, on measuring the information content of things, the complexity finite or complexity growing, this is like a baby version, a more concrete version of Cantor's hierarchy of bigger and bigger infinities. You see, because they're both systems that show that mathematics is open, that the world of mathematics is not closed, but Cantor's is much more theological, really. I feel...
Yes, what we said in different...
I actually feel that very much, that he's doing mathematical theology. But my version is an attempt to be as concrete as possible. And so I'm talking about software, I'm talking about algorithms, I'm talking about the size in bits of a program and using that as a measure rather than using this scale of bigger and bigger infinities, which is open. And there are two different ways of seeing that mathematics is open, it's not closed. But one is much more theological. There are moments maybe after drinking some wine that one feels in empathy maybe with Cantor's theory of infinities, moments like that.
Because you're able to break conventions. It's a Dionysiac effect.
Yeah, normally you look at a tree and you don't think the tree is infinite, the tree is God, etc. But a little bit of wine helps sometimes to make. But what this notion of measuring complexity in terms of bits of software, the reason I do it is to show that mathematics is open, mathematics is creative, there are infinite possibilities, it's not a closed system. But I'm doing it in a very down-to-earth way by talking about algorithms and everything. It happens to be a way that's in tune with this notion of a formal axiomatic theory and the notion of logic and proving things that goes back to Euclid, right? If not further, maybe to Pythagoras, maybe to Thales. But very important. I have nothing against it. I live in that world, right? But I attempt to see its richness, to prove using mathematical methods that mathematics is richer and open and not closed. Okay? So, but with a little bit of wine, or when you're out maybe when you're making love, if it's first love, the honeymoon moment, that the universe seems much bigger than it does normally.
I want to make a metaphor, but it will be like the highest point of the omega point.
There are moments when one can feel in empathy.
You're feeling the omega point.
You look at a scene, maybe in the mountains. I love mountains. I happen to love mountains and snow, where you feel that it's big, that it's infinite, that it's sublime. Mm-hmm. Sublime is close to transcendent. I have a very strong feeling of sublime.
But you remember
and beauty.
You remember we were talking about that when I raised the point that was raised by Kant, that makes the difference between between the beautiful and the sublime. He said the beautiful is limited and it's something that is symmetrical and all that, but the sublime is when it goes beyond that. It's actually the very definition of infinity. It's sublime.